All right, we're going to get started here. Good afternoon, good morning, or good right at noon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Simplify the Management of Your Supply Item Master. We are recording this, so if anybody logs on late or needs to drop off, we will have this available on our website after the webinar. We obviously appreciate you taking some time today. As we know, you're all very busy. And before we start, I'm going to go through the normal housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute, just to eliminate the background noise. But we do encourage you to interact with us and our speaker today. You can do that. The best way to do that is through the Q&A panel and not the chat panel. Please use the Q&A panel to ask questions if you have any. At the end of the webinar, we'll take some time to answer a few of those or all of them if we have the time. And today's presenter for our webinar is Jennifer Calhoun. She is a product manager here at Vitalware. And Jen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Dusty. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you guys are in the country. We're going to go ahead and get started. This should be a relatively quick, kind of fun little webinar. And if you have questions, as he mentioned, don't hesitate to throw them in the Q&A area. We'll try to get to them at the end. I have to start out with our quick little disclaimer. So there it is. Just a quick disclaimer that this is current right now, and if you're viewing this in the future, it may not be as current. Today we're going to do some quick learning objectives. We're going to talk a little bit about how to review the cost to charge ratio for your supplies and identify any outliers. And really we're focusing on how to use tools to really improve your efficiency when you're managing your supplies. We're going to talk a little bit about improving your visibility so that you can easily identify supply items related to your charge master or any other supply file relationships. We're going to talk about compliance and how to maintain that compliance through some tools. And then we're going to talk a little bit about using a workflow system to make sure your supplies are built correctly from the start. So the very first thing I want to talk about is building confidence in your pricing. So using a cost to charge variance is a great way to just kind of increase your confidence that your pricing is where you want it to be. A lot of people will have a standard rate that they'd like to apply a certain percentage higher. In our Vitalware tools, we have the ability to analyze your cost versus your charge and tell you that percentage. So it's really quick, easy way, and then using the filters, you can identify anything that's really out of line. You can see in the screenshot that we've got here, most of the supplies that are listed in this sample file fall in the 80 to 90 percentile for cost variance. And we have one outlier there that actually is down at just 56%. So just using that cost to charge ratio gives us a quick way to identify anything that we may want to take a little deeper look at to make sure that that pricing is really where we want it to be. A lot of times consistency is the key, but occasionally there are real reasons that you want to have a reduced price for something. So this just gives you an opportunity to review those. Another way you can build confidence in your pricing is to use some comparative data. So in our Vitalware tools, we have SAF data that we get from the standard analytical file from Medicare, and we allow you to pick peers, so you can pick hospitals similar size or in your local area that provide some of the similar procedures or supplies, and kind of give yourself a comparison of what your price looks like compared to what they reported to Medicare for those same CPT codes. So it's not 100% perfect, but it does give you a great opportunity to kind of see where you fall compared to your peers on your pricing so that you can feel comfortable. And it also gives you kind of a good idea of where you're going to fall when people start looking at those prices for pricing transparency. With the whole pricing transparency initiative kind of being in line with your peers is going to maybe be a little bit more important because we'll have more people looking at those numbers. You can see in the picture that I've got here that we compared our price to the weighted peer average charge. So in our tool, we take all of the peers and we average their prices against how many times they perform that procedure or use that supply or that CPT code. And that gives you the ability to see kind of an average and where you fall amongst that average, but we also give you the detailed data so you can see if any one peer is maybe skewing the average. If there's somebody that performed this procedure a ton of times and they're priced pretty high, that's going to jump your average up quite a bit, versus if you have somebody that has done it a million times, has got their price down really super low, they might be dragging it down. So gives you an easy way to kind of look at your price compared to your peers, and then also see if there's anybody that maybe you want to just kind of exclude for that particular supply. So these are tools that you can utilize to really just build confidence in your pricing. One of the other things that is a great idea to do with your supplies is to really get some visibility. A lot of times we hear from hospitals that their supplies are managed from different areas and they don't really have a good way to kind of visualize what exactly is going on from all the different areas. So some of the times that this can really help is if you have tiered pricing in your charge master. It's a great way to reduce the overall size, but in your charge master, you're just going to see those tiered price items, and it may kind of give you a sense of the unknown about what actually falls into that tier for that particular price. Sometimes you'll also find that the supplies that are in the OR maybe have their own entirely different supply file and their own data tracking method. So keeping those in line is a little bit more challenging if you can't see that file compared to your regular supply file at the same time. Also, if you have supplies that are maintained at individual hospitals, so if you're at a big health system and all the individual hospitals have their own supply storage and supply data, then it can be a little bit challenging to see what's going on across your entire health system. Whereas if you have a central supply, you really have a good idea that everything is in line. So in our Vitalware tools, we give you a great way to link all those files together so that you can really view across those different files or data sources and improve your comfort level with all of the information that's out there. So if you have to maintain it, it's really kind of nice to have a good visual. In the screenshot below, this is a picture of a tiered pricing, and you can see that we have an implant anchor there. It's at the tier level 2, and for that tier level 2, we actually have 101 different items. So the top half of our screen there, we've loaded the charge master that has the tiered pricing item, and it's kind of a group that actually contains 101 independent supplies. So down in the lower half, we have a separate file that's the actual item master, and we've loaded those separately, but linked them together with a linking factor. That linking factor can be a CPT code, it can be the procedure code. In this case, I think the procedure code is what we utilized, and that made it pretty easy. It could also be your supply ID. Any of the factors that are present in both your charge master and your supply item master could be used as a linking factor. And then we can build this view where you can see both at the same time. So here we've clicked on that procedure code that I have circled for that tier 2 anchor, and then that automatically opens up the supplies that are linked to that item. So you can see the 101 supplies that are linked in there and kind of get an idea of what's actually going into that group. So it's just a nice way to visualize your data across a couple different sources. And there's a ton of ways you could do this linking. This is just one example. If you wanted to link up files from different areas, you could do it that way as well. All right. One of the other things that's really critical is your compliance. It's really important that you are, of course, compliant with your supplies, just like anything else in your charge master or in your hospital in general. Our tool does some analysis for you. So we can set these analysis up to run every time you import your file. So if you want to import your file monthly, we can just have these run automatically for you, and it'll produce reports that'll help you identify things like expired HCPCS codes. If you have an expired HCPCS code in your charge master for supplies or in your supply item master, it's something that you probably want to take a look at just to make sure that you're ready to go. And in this example that I've got displayed here, you can see that we have Q4119, which is a code that expired quite a while ago. And we have a suggested code. So if you click on that HCPCS, all of the data in VitalWare is tied together to our referential tool set. So we know the suggested replacement codes because of our vital knowledge data. So we're able to tell you that our suggested replacement was Q4166, and that is still a current code. So it's still an applicable replacement that you might want to consider. Some of the other automated reports that we can provide and that would be useful to you if you're managing supplies are things like a revenue code mismatch report. Here you can see that I've circled a line where the revenue code applied to this particular supply is a 272, and that doesn't match what our best practices are. At VitalWare, we go ahead and categorize these into a best practices, and we also provide statistics. So our experts in the area have done some research, looked at the statistics, and said, you know, it's really most appropriate for that screw to be placed in a 278 revenue code. However, that doesn't mean that's the only acceptable revenue code. So you'll see right below the best practices, we've got the revenue code statistics that show you what Medicare has accepted based on that standard analytical file. So that 278 revenue code was used 91.8% of the time that this code was billed and paid by Medicare. 272 was used 2% of the time. So it's not that it won't be paid. It may be paid and it may be acceptable. So if you really want to stick with the 272, that's okay. We wanted to give you all the information to make that informed decision. So we're going to flag anything that doesn't meet our best practices, but we're also going to give you some information so you can make an informed decision based on your own use case. Another report that might be beneficial for you is a HCPCS to supply, or a HCPCS supply to procedure comparison. So for instance of related devices, here you can see that we've got a report that tells you that this particular procedure requires a device. And the way that Medicare rules work, they'll really accept any device, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily the most appropriate. And you really want to be compliant and use the codes that make sense. So in this example, we've got some devices that we think are probably good choices to use with that particular procedure. And we maintain this data set here at VitalWare. So this is a proprietary data set of related devices that we kind of keep an eye on and keep updated. You can see here that we've suggested two devices, either the A code or the C code. And in this case, we actually will analyze your file and tell you if you already have that particular supply somewhere. So you have that tissue marker in all those charge master locations that are circled over there on the right-hand side. In that case, it's entirely possible that you don't need to worry. You've already got it handled, but we do want to identify if there are any places that you don't have the appropriate supply for that procedure. So just kind of a nice comparative. And it goes both ways. We'll analyze your supplies and tell you these go with these devices. We'll analyze or the devices to go with these procedures and vice versa. The last piece that I want to talk about a little bit is using workflow. A lot of people have great supply management tools, but without a solid workflow, they don't have an easy way to audit, and sometimes building those supplies out in your item master can be a little bit daunting because you just don't have the information you need. So utilizing a workflow tool, although it may not be something you think of right away when you're talking about supply management, can really help to start out with the right information from the very beginning. With the Vitalware tools, you can use workflow on any file that you load. So if you load a supply item master separately from your charge master, or if your supplies are within your charge master, or both, you can build workflow on any file that you've loaded. And you'll see in the example here that we talk about building different routes. So the workflow isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all thing. It needs to be pretty customizable. So any tool that you're using for that workflow, it's probably going to help you the most if you can customize it to your needs. In this case, we have some separate routes for non-stock items versus stock items. And the difference really is that the non-stock items are not going to need quite as much review, whereas the stock items we're going to send from the original requester through the department manager, and then the purchasing manager, and then the CDM coordinator to make sure it's added to the charge master properly. So it kind of gets a 4-phase review, whereas the non-stock items just get a 3-phase review in this particular example that we've got here. We've also separated some areas because they're different people. So the OR department manager is probably not the same person as the cath lab manager. And we want to run these by the right people so that you get the right information and everything is appropriate from the start. This is kind of a little bit of a daunting page, but one of the things that I wanted to show you is the flexibility of a workflow tool should give you the ability to ask for the data that you need. So in this case, you can see a bunch of fields listed here. These are the fields that we are asking people to fill out before that information is passed forward. And we have, you can see each of the areas. This one is going from a requester to the purchasing manager to the CDM coordinator. And we're asking the requester to fill out all of these required fields. If they happen to know if there's an expiration date, great, that's an editable field, so they can add the information, but it's not necessarily required. And at Vitalware, these fields may not be part of your supply item master file. So your supply item master file probably doesn't include a field that says latex free, yes, no. But that is information that the person building this item out in the supply item master and the charge master might want to know. It helps them to make the appropriate decisions or to check their boxes that they have to. So we're able to build these custom interactive fields that people can populate for the workflow to be most effective and really provide all the necessary information to the purchasing manager and the CDM coordinator. And then we're able to say, okay, make that a required field. And then over here on the left, you can also see in our workflow system, we are able to set up a list. What's really nice about the list is that you won't get some people typing yes in all lowercase letters and some people just using a big Y and some people saying NA. If you use a list, then you're going to get consistent data results instead of many forms of the same information. So it's a lot easier to search on and to group and to really just manage the data if it's coming to you in a consistent format. So when you're setting up workflow to manage your supplies, I think it's really beneficial to do things like create a list to make it easy for the people that are providing information for you, and also provide instructions. We're just saying indicate if the item is latex free. That's a pretty easy and obvious one, but there are some things that might be a little bit more subjective or up for interpretation. So having an ability to give some instructions around that field can be helpful for the people filling it out and really make the process more simplified for them so that they're able to easily populate the information and move it forward to the next person. Really what you're doing is getting the information from the people who know it best to the people who need it, without the back and forth of a whole bunch of emails saying, wait, should this have latex or no? And then the other great thing about a workflow tool is that it gives you some tracking and some audit history. So you can see in this example, we've actually opened up a request for a supply. And here I've put in some names. This is an old request that I found back in our history. But you can see in the left-hand side, this request went from the original requester, John Smith, to the department manager, and then to the purchasing manager, and then the CDM coordinator, and it was finally approved by the CDM coordinator. The entire process took 7.91 days in this particular example, but knowing where those troubles are, where it takes extra time, might help you to know where you need to really spend some effort to make this process easier, or to know if there's somewhere that you need to really improve the process to make things more efficient. It also just gives you a great way to say, okay, who really needed this? So if you come upon this supply 3 years from now and you say, wow, nobody's used this in a long time, who asked for this? This gives you the tracking and ability to go back and find out who asked that. And then if they're still part of the hospital system, go ask them about it. So a great workflow tool can really help get that information in an organized and clear ways to help the purchasing manager. These are all great ways. So managing your compliance, giving you a great visual into all of the different supply storages and storage data areas, and using workflow. All of those are great ways to just kind of simplify your supply item master management through the use of a tool. Doing all of those things manually is a pretty big task, and everywhere that you can get help, I would totally suggest it. So we just kind of want to highlight some of the ways that you might not realize you could be using a tool to help you simplify that management. And that brings us to the end of my little presentation. So I think, Dusty, we're ready for some questions if we have any.
Yeah, that's great. Hopefully everybody got a tip or two they can take back and help make things a little easier. But yeah, we have a couple questions here to look at. Again, if you do have a question you want answered, just open up the Q&A panel, probably at the bottom of your screen, and type it in there, and we will do our best to answer. So one question we got, Jen, is our organization is on Epic. Epic's ChargeMaster platform approaches both supply and pharmacy charge files differently or separately from the standard procedure ChargeMaster. How does Vitalware accommodate Epic's dynamic supply platform?
That's a great question. So we have quite a few clients that are on Epic, and they will supply their ChargeMaster and their supply files separately. A lot of those clients will have shell records for pharmacy or supplies, and those shell records are kind of like that tiered pricing example that I showed, where that shell record is really a group that contains a whole bunch of individual supplies, or in the case of pharmacy, individual NDC items. So one of the things that Vitalware can do to help is to load both of those files and link them together to really give you that view of what is in your ChargeMaster for those shell records and what is your actual supplies that fall into those shell records. And both of those files can be analyzed separately so that you can analyze that independent supply file for things like compliance and pricing. So there's probably specifics depending on which Epic supply you use. So I think some people use Premier and some use a couple of other areas, PeopleSoft maybe. Your account manager at Vitalware should be able to give you some answers based on your specific scenario, but we absolutely can and have helped people who are on Epic with their supplies. Hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Great. And we can follow up with the person that asked that as well and see if they need any further help on that. Another question come in. It is, if we do not have a CPT HCPCS code in our CDM, will your report give us that info?
That's a great question and a challenging one. Our report won't necessarily give you all of that information as easily as we'd like it to. To analyze descriptions of the items is a big challenge, and we've actually been looking at best ways to do that, but an automated analysis of a description is something that we've found very challenging to produce accurate results. So we have our referential tools, which include an entire device data set and supply data set. So you have the ability to do a lot of lookup, but it requires some human intervention. We can't just immediately analyze and provide those CPT codes. However, if you have revenue codes associated, we might be able to tell you the revenue code to CPT codes, the CPT codes that often are applied with that revenue code, and that might give you an idea where to start. And utilizing our device data set, which also contains supplies, would probably be another good benefit.
Great. Another question, they're just asking about if they'd like the product without the workflow functionality, that's something that's available.
Absolutely. Our CDM product comes in a couple different forms. So if workflow isn't something that you need, you don't have to have it. And really all we're doing is we're using our CDM product to load supplies. So it's got all the functions of a CDM that you want.
Perfect. And we can follow up with that person as well to see if they need any more information about that. Right now, we don't have any other questions come in. We can give it a minute or so to see if anybody else has one. Otherwise, I will remind everybody still on that the best ways to kind of keep up with us as we produce more webinars and more content that hopefully is helpful for you is to either follow us on LinkedIn, or if you go to our website, at the bottom of any page is a sign up for our monthly newsletter called The Mid, where we will send you webinars that are coming up, even past webinars that you can view on demand, FAQs, and things like that. So please sign up for that if you haven't, and or follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll make sure everybody stays up to date on what's coming up next. Otherwise, no other questions. Oh, I think one just popped up maybe. How current is the peer pricing comparison?
Oh, that's a great question. So the SAF data is released quarterly. It used to be yearly, and a while back they changed it to quarterly. As soon as we get a new quarter, we're immediately putting our guys on doing the statistics and getting it out there. So it usually runs, I think it's about 6 months behind because it's a whole quarter and then it takes a little bit to get the data. But we'll actually, in the tool, there's a hover that tells you what the date range for that peer data is, so you know for sure what dates are included. And it's not as old as it used to be now that they're releasing quarterly.
Perfect. And how many can you compare at a time, Jen?
So we say up to 20. Once you kind of get over 15, it starts to slow the data results. So sometimes it's easier if you want to run an analysis of your 10. And one of the things that's nice in our tool is you can set up as many analyses as you need. So if you want to set up a local group of 10 and then maybe a peer group of another different 10 that are similar hospitals in size and what they do, but maybe aren't local. So if you've got a couple different groups, you can run multiple analyses. So up to 20 in a single analysis, but really, if you want to run a whole bunch, it might be better to break them into groups and run separate analysis.
Perfect. Well, great. That is all the questions we had come in. If you are a VitalWorks client, obviously you can reach out to your account manager for more questions or options of getting things turned on if they're not on today. And if you're not a client, obviously reach out to us on our Get Started page on our website, and we'll make sure to follow up there as well. Appreciate everybody joining us today, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. See ya.